Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this video lesson about Reconstruction. This is part 2 of 2 video lessons about this era. So without further ado, let's get cracking. All right, so today we're going to talk about radical Reconstruction. We're going to talk about the economic problems of Reconstruction, the Southern reaction to this radical Reconstruction. We're going to go over some conclusions, the big picture stuff that we can pull from Reconstruction. Now, I want to have a little caveat here. This is not comprehensive. There's a lot more to talk about this than I'm going to include here. I mean, people take entire courses just on Reconstruction by itself. But this is going to give us an overview and kind of a starting point, so that way we can explore these issues in much greater detail in class. So let's do it. So radical Reconstruction effectively was, as I say up at the top there, an extended period of military rule over southern states. Basically, what the United States did was establish military dictatorships in all of the Reconstruction states. And I'm going to have a map for you about this. We passed the 15th Amendment, which banned the denial of the franchise. Basically, it gave black men the right to vote, not women. Women would not get the right to vote until until the 20th century, right? So the women still have quite a ways to go, but with the passage of the 15th Amendment, we get the black male universal suffrage, right? So then the Republicans passed the Tenure of Office Act because they wanted to stop Johnson from firing all of Abraham Lincoln's cabinet people. Now, this was deemed unconstitutional. It passed overwhelmingly in Congress, but the Supreme Court overturned it because it violated the separation of powers. The president has complete control over his cabinet. He can fire whomever he wants. You do need Senate approval of cabinet secretaries, but if the president wants to remove them, he may do so. Now, all of this tension and all of this animosity and just bad vibes between Johnson and Congress, as I talked about in the previous video lesson, resulted in Johnson's impeachment. Andrew Johnson was the first president to be impeached. The next impeachment would not happen until William Jefferson Clinton in the 90s. But Johnson was not convicted in the Senate trial, so he was able to serve out his term. Now, here is a lovely little map of Reconstruction, or of military Reconstruction. Now, as you can see, each region of the South has been divided up into military districts, and effectively there was a person appointed who operated as dictator in that district. So this is an issue when you're talking about people who view themselves as United States citizens, people who think they have a right to constitutional rights, right? And then you've got effectively martial law throughout the entire South. Now, it should be noted that this was done in an effort to stop Southerners from engaging in such horrific discrimination against newly freed slaves. But when you want to achieve a particular goal, you have to think about how the actions you take to achieve that goal. And sometimes, even though your goal is admirable, the actions you take don't allow you to achieve that goal. It gets lost in the various actions that were taken. So establishing military dictatorships in the South probably wasn't the best way to go to try to unify the Union, or reunify the Union. So problem number one really is economics. The plantation-based economy is no longer viable now. Slavery is banned. It is not allowed. And because it was the basis for all of Southern society, both political, economic, and social, we need something else. So what actually started happening was this contract wage labor system and sharecropping. Both of these systems were inherently unequal and actually resulted in an economic disaster for the South. It was not helpful to anyone who participated in it. Sharecropping, as I have here, it's a system of agriculture where landowners allow a tenant, basically a renter, to use the land in return for a share of the crops that are produced on the land. But of course, in sharecropping, you don't have your own resources, so you have to go to the landlord and say, hey, like, I need seeds, and I need, like, a plow, and, like, you know, horses or something. And so the landowner is more than happy to give this to you at a very, very high interest rate. So you go into debt before you even grow anything. And the system is situated so that if you're a sharecropper, there is no way you're ever able to leave that land. You will never make enough money to go off on your own. You will be stuck there. So it's slavery without calling it slavery. So, but what it did, even though it seemed to help the landowners, the Southern economy went and it would not recover until the New Deal in the 1930s. So this is a massive, massive problem that we did not solve. So a key issue with reunifying the country and moving forward in a positive direction was solving this economic problem. We did not solve it, so we did not move forward, and things were not positive. Now, when you look at economic losses, and this is a tough one because for the South, their economic basis was slaves. To them, they viewed slaves as property. Of course, now reasonable people view slaves, they were people, they were not property. But when you look at, if the South considers slaves property, and then you look at what they had in 1860 versus what they went down to in 1870, you're looking at massive economic losses. That's like taking away, I don't know, 2/3 of the United States overnight. And what do you do? Like, how do you navigate that? The responsible and intelligent thing would have been to help the South establish a new economic base, a new economic system, to come in and invest and help build factories, help build infrastructure, railroads, roads, canals, schools, hospitals, rebuild the South. But we didn't do that. We just removed what they consider to be their property. So when you look at the South is completely decimated. It has no way to rebuild by itself. So we're still in problem number one, economics. So the country devolved into a severe depression during radical Reconstruction. Now, radical Republicans were blamed for this mismanagement because they did institute a lot of social programs that were designed to help freedmen and to help poorer people get on their feet, but this caused huge state debt, which nobody liked. Now, what happens? Conservative Democrats are elected to Congress. Now, something to note about conservative Democrats, their nickname, the Dixiecrats, okay? The Democrats at this time period are the party of slavery. They're the party of the KKK. By 1866, as I'll point out in a later slide, the KKK effectively was the Democratic Party. So because the radical Republicans were trying to just ram things through, they did a lot and they did it really fast. They didn't think through everything they were doing. And they got such blowback from the revenge seeking that they engaged in that they caused exactly what they were trying to avoid. They got basically all these conservative Democrats elected to Congress, and you've got the KKK serving in Congress and controlling government at this point. And this sets all advantages that were put in place for freedmen, gone. Like, they disappear. Overnight, they disappear because all of these Democrats were elected to Congress and they overturned everything the radical Republicans did. And on top of that, instituted things that made life for freed slaves even harder than it already was. So, percentage of wealth owned by the bottom 90% of households. Now, this holds particular interest for us as well. Now, if you look throughout world civilizations, when you see a mismatch of wealth and a stratification, you could call it, with a massive difference between the haves and the have-nots, and the haves have way more than the have-nots, you have problems. You have social problems, you have political problems, you have economic problems. And if society can't sustain itself that way. So when you look and you start in 1780, the percentage of wealth owned by the bottom 90% was over 50%. Now flash forward all the way to 2010. Whoa. Now that wealth didn't just disappear into thin air. It went to the top 10%. So when you have wealth concentrated amongst that small group of people and it's effectively taken from the bottom set of folks, you're going to have economic issues. So I want you to see this transition. This is going to be very, very important for U.S. history moving forward. It's going to be particularly important when we talk about the age of the robber barons during the Industrial Revolution. You can see there's a steep drop over here too. You can see massive problems right around there. All right, so Southern reactions to radical Reconstruction, it was not good. So black codes were enforced, as I said in the last video lesson, through private enterprise and also community pressure. The KKK was founded in 1865 as a response to the Southern loss in the Civil War, and I already said that one. By 1866, KKK is the Democratic Party. Now, President Grant was trying to do the best he could, but sadly, he was a very ineffective president. He was a great general, but a bad president. He responded with arrest and prosecution of Klan members, which, looking at our situation, like I think that's great. Arrest those guys. They're not good guys. Like, these are not nice people. That in and of itself isn't a massive problem, but you got military intervention and you've got martial law in all the southern states. This created a massive problem. Even sympathetic people were like, whoa, I don't think I like the federal government enacting that kind of power. So this kind of gave some credence to southern concerns, and it also weakened the strength of the radical Republicans and in their efforts to try to make things better for newly freed slaves. Now, I'm not going to explain this chart. I'm not going to explain this graph. I want you to pause this video, all right, and I want you to look at this graph, and I want you to pull out important information from this graph. I want you to just see, I want to see what conclusions you can draw and what information you can pull from this. And we're going to discuss this in more detail in class. So pause the video, make some notes. We'll talk about it later. So, additional Southern reactions. The Supreme Court ruled in 1872 that the federal government exceeded its authority, that it didn't have the authority to do that, so all of Grant's initiatives were overturned anyway. Right? So this was like a real celebration, like a boon to the Southern resistance. All dealing with racial and Reconstruction problems, the court deemed a state issue. That was a problem, and that is going to set the tone for the rest of the 1800s and even into the early 1900s, with the black codes remaining in effect, followed by Jim Crow. The Supreme Court also declared the Civil Rights Act unconstitutional, even though it was passed with overwhelming Republican support. They declared that unconstitutional in 1883. So the last vestiges of anything the radical Republicans did to help newly freed slaves, gone by this point. All right, so this is the federal budget. Now, I love talking about budgets because debt is a problem, and it's important that we not only learn to understand the importance of the budget, but also we learn how to read these charts. So if you look at, we have our categories here. We've got War and Navy departments, we've got total expenditures, and then we've got total revenue. Expenditures is how much you spend, revenue is how much you bring in, right? So how much were the War and Navy departments costing us? Okay, so in 1848, 38.5 million, whatever. You go to 1865, whoa, we're in the billions now. Ooh, all right, so how much did we spend in 1865? We spent that. How much did we take in? Oh, we're quite short. So now we have what's called a budget deficit, okay? Now we've borrowed, all right? We are spending more than we're taking in. This is a problem, okay? And this is a particular problem for us currently as well that we need to examine. All right, the South, still economic problem number one. Now, this chart is a bit dated, as this is several years behind the times. I'm still trying to find a chart that actually does this exact thing. If anybody finds something, let me know, and I will update this lesson and add it to the PowerPoint. But as of 2011, if you look at all of these southern states, what their jobless rate is, what their jobless rank was, their poverty rate and their poverty rank, like, ooh, southern states still have serious economic problems. And even if you just look at individual states currently, and we're approaching 2020 now, these states are still a problem. They still have massive poverty. So we are still not recovered from the leftovers, the vestiges of Reconstruction and its failure. So conclusions. The North grew weary of the problem. It was taking too long. Americans have short attention spans, and even though something deserves our attention and deserves our focus, we get bored and we don't want to deal with it anymore. And that's basically what happened with the North. They stopped viewing it as a big moral issue that they needed to deal with, so they just ignored the South. They just stopped paying attention, and they pulled their attention from it. So black codes remained because of this, and were immediately followed by Jim Crow laws, which we'll talk about when we arrive at that era. The Southern economy and landscape were absolutely devastated by the Civil War. This created massive resentment, additional racism, additional persecution, and this largely resulted in racist attitudes, unchanged, and still continuing into the 21st century, even until this very day. Big lesson from Reconstruction. If you want real change, you have to be strategic about that change. You have to be reasonable about that change. And you have to pursue it in a reasonable way that will allow for compromise to occur. Is that fair? No, it's not. But radical Republicans were doing the right things, certainly in my opinion and in a lot of people's opinions, but because they did too much too fast, all of it was gone. And it was replaced by the Dixiecrats, by conservative Democrats who were effectively the KKK. So if there's one thing we can learn from this is that real change is deliberate and it's cautious, and that revenge seeking accomplishes nothing. Even if the other party deserves it, you're not going to win. Both sides are going to lose. So you have to find a way to bring the other side over to your corner insofar as you can. Now, websites. Now, I'm going to post this PowerPoint on Google Classroom, so you can go get it. But I want you to go to each of these links, and I want you to take some notes. Does that mean you have to write everything down? No, it does not. It says do not. If you write everything down, you're doing it wrong. I'm not giving you any credit. No credit. Big picture, guys. Give me a little summary. Give me bullet points, all right? Read through everything and then pull out what is the most important out of these things, okay? Do not write down everything. And that is the end of Reconstruction, or at least the Reconstruction video lessons. I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you next time.